Hi everyone, this is Elia, and welcome to part 2 on the acid remedies. I did receive some emails after the session from yesterday requesting that I use a little bit more of the McRepertory and ReferenceWorks programs during the course of my presentation. So I've decided to do a different case here where I'll have the opportunity to use the software in a number of different aspects to the program overall. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll go ahead and read through the case, and same rules apply. If you could simply write down those symptoms or those ideas or themes that you think are important, and then I'll ask you to type those into the control panel, and either myself or Mandy or Penny will field the questions or suggestions that you make. Penny, maybe you could mute yourself out, or Mandy could mute yourself out because I can hear you. Thank you. Please go ahead and write down any thoughts you have about the case. As much as you can participate, that would be really welcome. Okay, so this is a case of a 17-year-old girl, and her chief complaint is amenorrhea. She's quiet and bashful during the interview, and she confirms that she's generally very quiet and shy, and this is since she was a young child. She doesn't speak up, and she's also easily embarrassed. Her last period was 6 months ago. The onset of the menses was at the age of 15, and this was about 3 years later than her schoolmates. The periods were very painful. She has cramps with the periods, and this forces her to bend double. And she'll curl up in a fetal position, which does help to relieve the cramps. She gets very depressed during the periods, and she gets very sick before the periods. And during this time, she needs quiet and dark. So during the menses, she needs quiet and dark. She gets headaches, which are better from a cold washcloth on the forehead. She has disturbed sleep. She has trouble falling asleep and frequent waking. She just can't sleep. She cries easily. She says, "I don't know why." She has a lump in her throat. She feels like she has to swallow, but the lump won't go away. And the lump is worse when she cries. She often gets the lump at other times too, when crying or when embarrassed. Okay, so that's the case. Any suggestions on important symptoms, things that you think are important in this case? Let's see, there's a question here. Okay, bending double relieves, very good, excellent. Any other thoughts? There's a long comment here, but I'm trying to get to the beginning of it. Okay, any other thoughts on important symptoms in the case? Embarrassed since a child, okay. Anything else? Any suggestions on remedies? Would anybody like to put forward better curling up? So that's better bending double, better curling up. That's an important modality. Remember, in aphorism 133 of the Organon, Hahnemann emphasizes the importance of modalities. Aphorism 105 through 145 is the section of the Organon that specifically focuses on case taking, and in aphorism 133, Hahnemann particularly emphasizes the importance of modalities. So anytime you've got modalities, generally those will be important. They generally speak to the sensitivity and susceptibility of that particular individual. So for example, for me, I would also take the worse from noise and worse from light, because he needs quiet and dark. Somebody suggested the lump in the throat, and I think that's also a very interesting symptom as well, the lump in the throat. So you've got the better, worse light, worse noise, better bending double, the lump in the throat, the weepy, embarrassed. Anything else anybody would like to suggest? Anybody have thoughts on remedies? Any suggestions for a remedy here? The lump is worse when crying. Okay, I'm waiting. Just give you a couple of more seconds. Okay, so somebody suggests the remedy pulsatilla. And I think that's a very reasonable suggestion. You know, you've got this person with menstrual issues and amenorrhea who's quiet and shy, who's easily embarrassed, who weeps a lot, you know, who's better from a cold washcloth. And yeah, in my mind at least, pulsatilla seems to fit the case pretty well. Let's continue and see what it says here. It's written, had used pulsatilla 30C on an as-needed basis for PMS and cramps in the past. Maybe it helped a little with the headaches, used it for 3 months, and then the periods stopped. So this is a disconcerting piece of information here. It seems as if this individual has been taking pulsatilla 30C. She's been taking it on an as-needed basis, so she's been taking it on a regular basis for her PMS and cramps. She thinks maybe it helped with the headaches a little bit. She's not sure, but after using the pulsatilla for 3 months, her menses has stopped, and now she has amenorrhea. Now, if you look at the organon, and specifically at aphorism 247, you'll see that Hahnemann writes, it is an unexecutable project to repeat the same unmodified dose once, let alone many times. And then he goes on to say that if you do that, if you keep repeating the remedy in the same potency without changing that potency between the doses, that you can graft symptoms which are dissimilar to the life force onto that patient's situation. So symptoms which the patient didn't have before could be grafted on. And I believe that's what happened here, is they were taking pulsatilla 30C on an as-needed basis. They weren't changing the potency between the doses, and as a consequence, they proved the remedy and developed amenorrhea. So this is kind of a complicated situation that we find ourselves in. We certainly can't give pulsatilla any longer since that's what they're proving. I actually went ahead and repertorized the case. Let me go ahead and show you the repertorization that I did. So I'm going to open up the case. I'm going to click on my folder over here. And then the name of the case is 17-year-old girl. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And here are the rubrics that I saved. And I'm going to go ahead and open those up. And here you can see that the symptoms that I chose were sadness during the menses, sensitive to light, sensitive to noise, timidity, bashful, weeping before the menses, head pain, cold application ameliorates, headache, cold application ameliorates. We could combine those two. I'll show you how you would do that in a second. The headache before the menses, the sensation of the lump in the throat, the delayed menses in girls, the painful dysmenorrhea, the pain in the uterus bending double ameliorates, and the sleeplessness before the menses. I think that's a fair representation of the symptoms. Let's go ahead and combine these two together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on head pain, headache, cold amelioration in general, and also head pain, headache, cold application ameliorates. So what I did is if you have a Macintosh computer, you'll hold the command key down on your keyboard. And if you've got a Windows computer, you're going to hold the control key down on your keyboard. And while you're holding down the control and or command key, you're going to click on the various rubrics that you would like to have selected. So you can see here that I've selected these two rubrics, and then I'm going to hit the plus key on my keyboard. And when I hit the plus key, this little window pops up, and it gives me the opportunity to give the new rubric a name. So I'm going to call it head pain cold ameliorates. Okay, and I'll click OK. And you'll notice now that the two rubrics that I used to create the new rubric are crossed out, which means they will no longer affect the repertorization. And you can see at the very bottom, at number 14, I've got a new rubric here, head pain cold ameliorates, which is essentially a combination of these two rubrics over here. If I go ahead and click on my analysis icon, which is in the toolbar on the left-hand side over here, I can see the repertorization of this case. And you'll see that, not surprisingly, the first remedy that comes up in the analysis is the remedy pulsatilla. If I continue to read down the repertorization, natmur, phosphorus, silica, zincum, aristolochia, sulfur, calcarea, lycopodium, nux vomica, none of these remedies, at least in my mind, seem to fit the case all that well. So what I would probably do in a situation like this is I would select a fewer number of rubrics. This was a fairly large number of rubrics to repertorize. When you repertorize using a large number of symptoms, you tend to have the polycrests coming up higher in your analysis. So I think what I would do here is I would remove some of the more general or less characterizing symptoms of the case. So I'm going to click on clipboard A to open that up. And I'm going to click on clipboard 1 to open that up. Okay, so now I've got clipboard A and clipboard 1 both opened up. In McRepertory, you can open a lettered clipboard and a number clipboard at the same time. So I've got a lettered clipboard and a number clipboard. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select those rubrics, which I think are more aphorism 153 types characterizing symptoms, more striking, strange, peculiar signs and symptoms of the disease. So I'm not going to choose the sadness during the menses. It's a fairly common symptom. I will take the sensitive to light because it's a modality, and generally speaking, the modalities are very useful in helping to narrow down our remedy choices. So I'm going to click on oversensitive to light, and I'm going to drag it over to clipboard 1 and let go. And you'll see that when I do that, it copies the rubric that was in clipboard A over to clipboard number 1. I'll do the same thing with sensitive to noise. I'll click on sensitive to noise, so that's now highlighted. And again, I'll click, hold my mouse button down, and drag that over to clipboard number 1 as well. I've got now 2 rubrics in clipboard number 1. Timidity, bashful, I could choose that, but I'm actually going to decide not to include that in my repertorization. And the primary reason for that is because sometimes the mental and emotional symptoms of the case are really the normal qualities of that individual. And really what we prescribe the remedy for is the change in feeling and function. If you read aphorism 153, you'll see that Hahnemann says the more striking, strange characteristics, signs, and symptoms of the, and he doesn't say patient, he says disease. That is actually what you prescribe the remedies to, is you prescribe them towards the change in feeling and function. The German word is Verstimmen, which means mistunement of that patient's life force. And that's really what we direct the remedies to. And sometimes the mistunement of the patient's life force will affect the mental and emotional state, but sometimes that's simply the qualities of that individual's personality and really nothing to do with the pathology, and therefore not part of the remedy picture. I could say a lot more about that, but let me just say for the purposes of this example, I'm going to, just for safety purposes, not choose timidity, bashful. I'm also not going to choose the weeping, tearful before the menses. Again, it's a fairly common symptom. I'm not going to choose the headache before the menses. I will choose the sensation of the lump because it is so unusual and peculiar. So I will select that. I'll click and drag that one over. I'm not going to choose the delayed menses in girls because it used to be 100 years ago that women would get their menses in general around the age of 15 or 16 or even 17 years of age. I believe now, because of the introduction of excessive hormones into the food chain, that women are getting their menses at an earlier age, but we can't say that it's necessarily pathological. And because I'm focusing on the mistunement, the Verstimmen of that patient's life force, the change in feeling and function, I'm going to decide not to include this. I'm not going to include the dysmenorrhea. It's a huge rubric and not going to help me to narrow down my remedy choices in any way whatsoever. I will choose the pain in the uterus bending double ameliorates. It's a modality. It speaks directly to the susceptibility and sensitivity of the chief complaint that this patient is reporting. I will also include the sleeplessness, and I'll also include the head pain, cold, ameliorate combined rubric that I created earlier. So I've now basically limited my repertorization to simply 6 rubrics as opposed to the original 13 that I had before. And I think this is a more representative representation of the more characterizing symptoms of the case. And if I click on clipboard number 1 and again click on my repertorization icon in the toolbar, you can see that I get a completely different list of remedies coming up in the analysis. As a matter of fact, the first remedy here is aconite, followed by bufo, belladonna, nux vomica, phosphorus, chamomilla, and so on and so forth. So in the first repertorization, which was in clipboard A, the remedy that came up was the remedy pulsatilla. In the second repertorization, which was a more limited repertorization of 6 rubrics, the first remedy was the remedy aconite. Now, I'm curious, does anybody have any comments about that? That in the first repertorization, when I chose the initial 13 rubrics, I came up with the remedy pulsatilla, and in the second repertorization, I selected just 7 rubrics, and I came up with the remedy aconite. And somebody suggested correctly that these are both in the same botanical family. So that's interesting. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not prepared to prescribe aconite for this particular patient. It doesn't seem to me that their symptoms are covered properly by aconite with my understanding of that remedy. So I wouldn't think about aconite as the best remedy choice. But the fact that pulsatilla came up high in one of my repertorizations and aconite came up high in my other repertorization makes me think at the very least that maybe I need another remedy from this botanical grouping. Now, these are both members of the Ranunculiciid family, or Ranunculaceae family, which includes remedies like Ranunculus bulbosus and Staphysagria and Helleborus and Hydrastis canadensis. These are all members of this particular botanical grouping. So I could say maybe, I don't know for sure, but maybe this person needs another remedy from this particular botanical grouping. And what I can do with the McRepertory software is I can limit at any point my repertorization just to the members of a particular grouping. There's a number of different ways of doing this, but one way to do it is to simply right-click on the remedy that you would like to limit your analysis to. I'll go ahead and do that on aconite here. I'll right-click. And you'll see that about halfway down, there's an option called Limit Window to Remedies Family. And this includes all of the groupings which include aconite. So you can see that aconite is a member of the Dahlgren plants. This is a particular taxonomical hierarchy, a grouping that's based on morphology or the way the flower looks. So if you look at the Ranunculiciids, you'll see that they all have very similar looking types of flowers. The conquest is another system based on morphology or similarity of form. And then you have the APG system, which is based on the DNA of the plants. This is a system which was introduced in 1998 in Uppsala, Sweden. You could use any one of these because the level of the Ranunculiciid, they're all the same. You also have other types of groupings like miasmatic groupings, groupings according to Bentley's color schemes, Yakir's groupings, and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on one of the Ranunculiciae. I'll choose the one under APG, or Angiosperm phylogeny group system. And what that does essentially is it limits my repertorization to just the Ranunculiciids. And I can now go and look at these various Ranunculiciids. Now, I'm not going to give aconite because aconite really doesn't fit the totality of the characteristic symptoms of this particular case. I'm not going to give pulsatilla because it seems to me at least that this person's been proving pulsatilla, and that's why they've developed amenorrhea. The next remedy is called Aquil. You may or may not be familiar with that one, so you might want to read it. Next one after that is Simicifuga. There are some aspects of Simicifuga that might make me think of this case, but overall, I wouldn't think of Simicifuga, nor would I think of Helleborus or Staphysagria or Ranunculus. So the remedy here that I might not know very much about is the remedy Aquilegia vulgaris. And what you can do is you can click on that remedy, and there's an option here for viewing the remedy in reference works. And if you click on that, it will take you over to reference works, and it will show you the remedy Aquilegia over here and all of the books that have some type of description of Aquilegia. I'm going to go ahead and just see what Berkey has to say about it. So I'll go and look in Berkey. And so under general, under Barraquis Materia Medica for the remedy aqualesia, Barraquis writes a remedy for hysteria, globus and claus hystericus. Now that's the old term for a lump in your throat, and that's exactly a symptom that she had in the case. Women at climaxis, well, that's women in menopause, that doesn't apply here. Sleeplessness in all caps, that's one of the prominent symptoms of the case. Nervous trembling of the body, sensitive to light and noise, dysmenorrhea of young girls. Now, I don't know about you, but that, in my mind at least, fits the case very nicely. And this was the remedy that was prescribed to the particular person. We can see what happened. So she's given aqualesia, 1 dose of 200C. At the 4-week follow-up, she had her period 3 weeks ago. It was the first in 6 months. 3 days after the dose, weeping at the drop of a hat, anything would get me going, lump in throat from emotions. Like before the menses, except no headache, sleeping well, didn't feel sick. 3 days later, period started, spotting first day. Second day of period, normal flow, cramps, better bending double, wanted to curl up on couch, wanted back or feet rubbed, not as bad as usual. I don't know, I just feel better. If you remember in aphorism 253 of the Organon, Hahnemann alludes to the very first positive action of the remedy as somebody just saying, you know, a kind of, they don't know what, but they just kind of feel better, kind of returning naturalness. So this is very typical when you've given the correct remedy in a case. The 8-week follow-up, the period surprised me 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks after the last one, no symptoms before, mild cramping on first day of real flow, wanted feet rubbed but did not have to curl up on the couch. 16-week follow-up, 2 more periods right on schedule, no premenstrual symptoms, no headache, sleeping well, has not felt the lump in the throat at all, still cries easily in movies, sad or when the dog comes home or when boyfriend does something nice for her. That's just me. No cramping with these past 2 periods. I've been feeling less hesitant to confront people to assert my needs. And so basically 1 dose of aqualesia and basically all of her symptoms, including the amenorrhea, were resolved. And this is a good, interesting case because it's one where it would be difficult to find the remedy just using a normal repertorization strategy. And you can even see that here in the analysis here that aqualesia is actually missing from a lot of important symptoms in the case. For example, it's not in the rubric pain in the uterus, bending double ameliorates, which is a very important symptom in the case. And it's not in the rubric sleeplessness before the menses, and it's not in the rubric head pain cold ameliorates. So it's missing some very important symptoms. And you might say to yourself, well, how can I possibly prescribe aqualesia in a case like this when it seems to be missing from so many important rubrics in the repertorization? And what you have to remember is that not all remedies have the same level of representation in our literature, in our repertories, and in our materia medicas. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to go ahead and open up the remedy and word search window. I can do that by either typing Control or Command plus the letter F for find, or I can click on search and select remedies and word. Here you can see the keyboard command is Control and or Command plus the letter F. And what I'm going to do is just see how many rubrics the remedy pulsatilla is in. So I'll type in pulsatilla and I'll click on the search button here. And if I select on all, I can see that pulsatilla is in 20,882 rubrics. Let's try that with aconite. I'll click on new search and I'll get rid of pulsatilla and I'll type in aconite. And I can see that if I click on search and select all, that aconite is in 12,843, almost 13,000 rubrics. Let's try it with aqualesia. So with aqualesia, A-Q-U-I-L, and then click on search. And if I select all, you can see that aqualesia is in only 132 rubrics in the entire complete 2016 repertory. The fact that it comes up at all is astounding. And you can see that you have to give it a little bit of slack. Now, if this was a remedy like pulsatilla or sulfur or belladonna or lachesis, and it's missing from really important rubrics or symptoms from your case, you don't tend to give it so much slack because you know that those remedies are very well represented in our literature, very well represented in our repertories, very well represented in our rubrics. And so when it's missing, you have to give yourself a lot of pause and think, is this really the best choice? But when you're dealing with a remedy like aqualesia, which is so poorly represented, the fact that it's missing from certain rubrics doesn't make you pause at all. And as you can see from the description of it in Berkey's Materia Medica, it really is a very excellent choice in this particular case. And basically that was demonstrated to be true based on the patient's response. Okay, so that's the case. And it allows us to basically show how we can use some interesting features in the MIC repertory program. Are there any questions or comments about this particular case or anything that I demonstrated in the MIC repertory or reference work software that anybody would like some clarification about? And there was a long comment here, which from John, but I'm trying to get to it's so long, I have to get to the beginning of it. Okay. Okay, Gallic-Mass, which I'm seeing as a hybrid remedy cross between animal, insect, vegetable, and mineral plus a pinch of parasite, and the mineral part is not very strongly represented. That's really helpful. I suspect that you're planning to use the webinar to, I can't read anymore. It's not going any further down. Okay, sorry, John, it doesn't seem to want to go any further. I can't read any further. Okay, not my hold on, my mouse seems to be frozen. Hold on, guys. Sorry, the mouse doesn't seem to be working. 1 second. I don't even know if you can hear me or not. Sorry, guys. I'm having a little bit of a computer issue here. Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me? Mandy, can you hear me? Hello? Mandy, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes. Yeah, I can hear you, Kim.
Hold on. Can you hear me now?
Yes. I can hear you, Kim.
Okay, fine.
You've gone very faint.
Sorry about that. I was having some technical problems. So, okay, well, let's do another case. Were there any questions or comments, Mandy? Anybody have any comments or questions about that case?
No, not really. Other than I find it easier using to just right click on the remedy and then you can go right down to combine rubrics. It's just slightly shorter way of doing it, not on the case, just on the combining rubrics.
That's another way to do it. There's a number of different ways. You can also drag the remedies over to the little elimination tool over to the plus over here as well. So there's a number of different ways. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's do another case. Actually, let me just show you this case, since this is a pretty cool case. And it gets to show you a part of the program that probably a lot of you are not using, but which is invaluable in practice. And I'm almost so surprised that people don't use this more regularly. So, hold on 1 second, guys. All right. So I actually was teaching a week-long seminar in the Czech Republic. It's what they call the summer school, and it's 7 grueling days of teaching 8 hours a day. And it basically was teaching on a couple of few different subjects. One was homeopathy in the treatment of asthma, bowel nosodes, and also the Burning House and Therapeutic Pocketbook Repertory. And I started with the Burning House and Therapeutic Pocketbook Repertory, and I was presenting what are referred to as one-sided cases. I assume everybody knows what those are, but for those of you who don't know, one-sided cases are those cases where there's just not a lot of symptoms in the case, and it's very difficult to find the best remedy because you don't have clear modalities or locations or sensations or any of the things that we generally depend upon to prescribe the best remedy choice. In any case, on the second day, I was presenting these one-sided cases, and I was using the Therapeutic Pocketbook Repertory, and I could see from the faces of the audience that people were kind of skeptical because, you know, why is this guy talking about some book that was published in 1846? You know, we want the new remedies and the new ideas. But I persisted because I know the value of the Therapeutic Pocketbook Repertory, and I persisted presenting these one-sided cases. And on the second day, a woman, one of the students in the class, came up to me and showed me this photograph of her daughter. Here you can see the photograph, and she said, here's this photograph of my daughter. She's got this terrible impetigo. It's on her left cheek. It's aggressively spreading to the right cheek. I've given 7 remedies: sulfur, graphites, mesurium, basilinum, a few others, but no change, no effect whatsoever. Can you help? And I said, why don't we just do the case in front of the class using the Therapeutic Pocketbook Repertory? So, as I said, it really was a one-sided case. There was very little symptoms in the case. There was an ulcer in the center with blisters surrounding it. It's hard to see that here from the photo because there's a salve that's sitting on top of the impetigo. But basically, it's ulcerated in the center, and there are these blisters surrounding the ulcer. So that's one symptom that I have. It was worse at night. It was worse opening the mouth, but I mean, if you look at this, it's not surprising that it would be worse opening the mouth. It was also worse touch, but again, it's really not surprising that it would be worse touch. You'd be surprised if it wasn't worse touch. And then there was a sensation as if there was crawling like insects, and that was it. That's all the symptoms that I had in the case, were those 5 symptoms. Let me show you the repertorization in McRepertory. So I'll go ahead and open the case up. And here are the rubrics. You can see the ulcers with blisters around it, the worse at night, the worse from opening the mouth, the worse from pressure, and the sensation of crawling in the skin. Now, what's interesting is if I utilize one of the more contemporary Kentian type repertories like the Complete or even Kent's repertory itself, but any of the more contemporary repertories, and I use these same 5 rubrics, I can tell you right now that there will be many remedies that will cover all these symptoms. But the Therapeutic Pocketbook Repertory is a much more concise type of repertorial database. It only has 2,250 rubrics in total. It only has, let me show it to you, it only has 5 chapters. So it's incredibly concise. And one of the advantages, here you can see, just 5 chapters, one of the advantages to it is that if I repertorize these 5 rubrics, in this case, only one remedy will run through all 5 symptoms. And that would not be true for any other repertory that I use. There would be a number of remedies. And in the more current repertories, like the Complete 2017 or 2018, you're going to find many, many remedies running through all those symptoms. But because of the conciseness and accuracy of the Therapeutic Pocketbook Repertory, you will find only one remedy, and it really is the best choice in this particular case. So here's the repertorization, and if I analyze it, you can see that only one remedy comes through all of these particular rubrics using the 1846 Therapeutic Pocketbook Repertory. And remember that of all the repertories that we have at our disposal, it's the 1846 Therapeutic Pocketbook Repertory is the only reliable repertory that we have at our disposal, primarily because the Kentian repertories were all originally based on the work of George Yar, and Yar was very heavily criticized by people like Herring and Hahnemann and Dunham as being a very sloppy worker. So the foundation itself was very poor. And then Kent himself made a lot of errors by adding simply everything that anybody would send him. He wasn't a German speaker, and he didn't have the ability to discriminate very carefully, and consequently there was a lot of garbage that was added, and that tradition has just continued until we have our current repertories, which are just full of misinformation. Doesn't say that they're not valuable and that we use them every day in practice. We do, and they have tremendous utility, but we have to recognize that they're full of misinformation and that they have a certain high level of unreliability associated with them. In any case, that's not the case with the therapeutic pocketbook repertory, which is very reliable and very accurate in terms of the remedy additions and grading system associated with it. In any case, I opened up chronic diseases. We went through the symptoms of mercury, and it was very clear that mercury was the best choice for this particular young woman. And so I told the mother to give the child mercury 30C every 2 hours in solution, succussing 7 times between each dose, basically adhering to what Hahnemann writes in aphorism 247 of the Organon, where he says you shouldn't repeat the same potency between each dose, but that you should change the potency. In any case, they didn't have a 30C, they only had an 18C, so I told them to start with the 18C and to immediately switch to a 30C as soon as they got it. On the very first dose of 18C, this aggressively spreading impetigo immediately stopped spreading, and 60 hours later, she looked like this. So just to remind you, in 60 hours, she went from looking like this to looking like this. And I've seen some miracles in homeopathy. I've seen people with Parkinson's disease be cured, people with MS symptoms go away, but I've never seen anything quite like this, because your skin theoretically cannot heal from such an infection in a period of 60 hours. But her life force was very strong, and the power of homeopathy is quite amazing, and you can see what can be done with the right combination. And it also demonstrates the real power of the therapeutic pocketbook repertory, how it's an invaluable tool in day-to-day practice. Many people think that it's only something that we use for acute or first aid situations. That's absolutely not the case. It can be used for all kinds of different issues, including serious mental and emotional health issues. Berningshausen had a very busy practice in Germany and treated many, many different people with mental and emotional health issues. Okay, any questions about that case or anything about the therapeutic pocketbook repertory that I could answer? All right, there's some very long comments. Why don't I present one more case? Okay, and we can talk about it. All right. So this is a case I call Wine Connoisseur. I saw the following patient in Northern California during the summer of 1994. The patient, a 47-year-old real estate agent living in Sonoma County, was referred by a mutual friend of many years. My friend informed me that John had been very successful in real estate and had just purchased a large vineyard outside of Hopland, California. I met John at his office on a Friday afternoon. His eyes had a sunken appearance, and his face was pale and puffy, as if he were retaining water. I could smell his breath even though I was a good 3 or 4 feet from his chair. He seemed much older than 47, more like in his early 60s. He spoke quickly and seemed both irritable and impatient. He efficiently described his complaint as a tight sensation like a hard rock in his stomach. On further questioning, I was able to ascertain that the pain would come on usually after eating or even just drinking water. He indicated that anything could bring on the pain, but certain foods were worse, although he wasn't willing to be specific. He generally stayed away from salads because the dressings would always bring on the pain. Sometimes after drinking some wine or smoking some marijuana, he would stay up all night binging and then would end up vomiting for hours. During these vomit sessions, he would have heartburn with frequent nasty burps. He's also constipated, sometimes not going for days at a time. When he does try to go, he has to exert himself tremendously, and this will cause pain in his rectal area during and after the stool, which is dry and hard. He says that in general, his head feels dull and heavy, and his scalp is very sensitive to any kind of touch. He can't even wear a hat. He describes himself as a matter-of-fact type of person. He gets things done and doesn't have time for people who waste his time. In general, people don't cross him. They know he doesn't take shit from anyone. He desires all kinds of fruit. He also likes meat, cheese, especially goat, and good food in general. He estimates that he drinks about 3 to 4 glasses of wine a day, but only the best. He also smokes pot on occasion. Okay, so any thoughts or ideas on important symptoms, or if you'd like to, we don't have too much time here, we only have 20 minutes. So suggestions for remedies, although I can't seem to scroll down here for some reason. So any thoughts about this case? Either remedies, somebody suggested Nux vomica, and that's a very reasonable suggestion. I would definitely think of Nux vomica in a case like this. It's just that there's a better choice, but it's one that oftentimes is confused with Nux vomica. You'll see this remedy has a number of similarities. So that's a good suggestion, though. Any other thoughts? Let me show you a quick repertorization of the case. So I put a lot of rubrics in here just so you could see how many rubrics actually fit this remedy. So eyes sunken, pale face, swelling of the face, offensive odor of the mouth, industrious mania for work, hurry or haste, impatience, irritability, aversion to answering, refuses to answer, pain after eating, pain in drunkards, pain drinking aggravates, sensation of the stone in the stomach, sour eructations in drunkards, acrid excoriating eructations, corrosive eructations, burning eructations, pain after the stool, pain during the stool, pain during hard stool, external head touch aggravates, aggravated from vinegar, and I put that in there because the fact that when he eats the salad dressing, it aggravates him, desires fruit, and water aggravates, so that's a large number of symptoms which he had. And you can see that if I repertorize this case, the only remedy that runs through all of those symptoms is the remedy Sulphuricum acidum. I want you to notice that sulfur comes up high, lachesis comes up high, and also Nux vomica comes up high. And sulfur, lachesis, and Nux vomica are all remedies which are sometimes confused for various reasons with the remedy Sulphuricum acidum. So let me just quickly talk about this remedy because it's a really useful remedy both for acute and chronic situations. I find it a remedy that I give frequently in practice, especially in acutes. So let me just quickly talk about it. This was a remedy that was also introduced by Hahnemann and proved by himself and the various members of the Provers Union, including Langhammer and Gustav Wilhelm Gross. And this is a remedy that, like Nux vomica and bismuth subnitricum, has a very strong affinity for the digestive tract, for the stomach, for the large intestine, for the small intestine, for the rectum, for hemorrhoids, all kinds of different effects on the digestive system or alimentary canal. It also affects the respiratory system, and it's also a remedy that affects the blood and the blood vessels. There's a lot of bleeding in Sulphuricum acidum. Of all the acid remedies, it's the one that bleeds the most. Number 2 would be nitricum acidum, but number 1 would be sulphuricum acidum, and then probably gallicum acidum would be number 3 on your list. It bleeds so much that you might confuse it with remedies like Crotalus horridus or lachesis or Elaps coriolinus, other snake remedies which bleed as well. And it has a lot of similarities to the snake remedies and is a remedy that will oftentimes confuse with lachesis because of its very strong importance for menopausal hot flashes. It also affects the mucous membranes. It's both a left-sided and right-sided remedy, and you'll see that in the respiratory tract, it'll often affect the left lower and right upper respiratory part of the lungs. As I mentioned earlier, this is a very important remedy for menopause, for women with hot flashes. It's considered to be a very important remedy in old people because of the fact that older people don't heal properly, and so we think of it as a very good remedy for injuries where the person doesn't heal properly and they have a tendency towards necrosis or gangrene of tissue. So it's a remedy that you'll confuse very easily with lachesis. It's one of the most common remedies for menopausal symptoms. We oftentimes don't include it, but it's up there with sepia and lachesis and pulsatilla as being, and simisafuga as being a very, very important, and belladonna as being a very important remedy for menopause. And you'll see how many symptoms it actually shares with sulfur. With lachesis, many, many symptoms of bleeding and hot flashes and bleeding during the menopause, and a lot of similarities. It also, as I mentioned, has a strong tendency towards gangrene. Very good remedy for mechanical injuries, especially in injuries to older people where the ability to heal is not there and the healing process doesn't occur properly. That's when you'll think of sulphuricum acidum. These are people who tend to be very hasty, very hurried, very quick, and very restless. You'll think of remedies like metarhinum and tarantula and argentum nitricum and iodum and mercury, other remedies which tend to be very hurried and restless as well. This is one of the most hurried remedies in the entire Materia Medica. They can't do things fast enough. They're very, very impatient. And when things go too slowly, they become very irritable and very angry. And this is why you'll easily confuse it with Nux vomica, because they both have this impatience, this hurriedness. One of the differences is that in Nux vomica, there's this strong desire to overcome some obstacle which is preventing them from reaching their objective. So it's goal oriented. They have a goal and they're competing to achieve that objective. Anything that gets in their way is an obstruction, which makes them irritable and angry. In sulphuricum acidum, it's not so much about the objective or the goal as it is about doing things quickly and doing them fast. It's more about the hurriedness than the irritability about not achieving an objective. Yes, it does have that element as well, but it's not as pronounced as you will see it in Nux vomica. You will see that sulphuricum acidum is hurried in everything that it does. Hurried in writing, hurried in walking, hurried in movements, hurried in occupation, hurried during mental exertion, hurried while eating, and impatient about trifles. And again, you'll confuse it with remedies that are hurried, like metarhinum and dulcamara, argentum nitricum, tarantula, and lilium tigrinum, which is hurried but fruitlessly hurried. It's like apis. It has a symptom where they're hurried, but they don't accomplish very much, even though they are very hurried. You'll think of apis mellifica and lilium tigrinum as remedies that are very hurried, but they don't accomplish very much. The sulphuricum acidum people can be very serious as well, and this will remind you of remedies like aurum or natrum sulphuricum. And like Nux vomica, like metarhinum, they're very hurried and very impatient. They can be very, very irritable, very quiet, very peevish, very violent when things go too slowly, when things don't go the way that they want them to. And they can also have alternating moods as well, where they can be very quiet at times and then very hurried and very talkative at times. You will see great depression in sulphuricum acidum, which is why you can think of it as a remedy in typhoid states or zymotic conditions, septicemias, where there's a bacterial infection and the person is in a very low state, very, very sick with digestive problems. They can't even take a glass of water because they start to vomit and have diarrhea. And that could be a situation where sulphuricum acidum is indicated. They don't want to talk, they don't want to answer questions, and that might be the picture of sulphuricum acidum in these septicemias. In these types of situations, they'll answer the questions very slowly and with great deal of difficulty, and it will remind you of remedies like phosphoricum acidum or helleborus or alumina. They can have a hard time answering questions, and again, you'll see remedies in here like phosphoricum acidum. Sometimes they can answer monosyllabically with just a yes or a no. They'll be so exhausted, so depleted with these weakened digestive functions. Weak, exhausted, where sometimes you'll see that the exhaustion is out of proportion to the actual physical condition, where they seem to be more tired than what they should be, and they'll be trembling out of the exhaustion. Again, you'll think of this in typhoid states, septicemias, pernicious fevers. You can also see this exhaustion manifest on the mental plane after overuse of the sexual function. So they've had a lot of sexual activity, they've released a lot of seminal fluids, and then they become exhausted afterwards. And one very important symptom in sulphuricum acidum is a sensation of trembling. Sometimes you'll see it. Sometimes they'll simply describe the trembling, but you actually won't see it. But they'll say, I feel so weak, I feel that I'm trembling, but they'll describe the trembling, but you actually won't see it. They can actually say that they feel as if they're trembling from the top of their head to the tip of their toes, but again, you won't see anything at all. Sometimes they'll describe a sensation as if their brain is loose in their forehead and it's falling from side to side. It's a keynote of sulphuricum acidum that came out strongly in the proving. And one very important characteristic of the sulphuricum acidum pain is that it commences moderately, increases gradually, and then suddenly ceases without any type of warning. That is the characteristic that you'll find with sulphuricum acidum pain. It commences moderately, increases gradually, and then it will stop all at once without any type of warning whatsoever. The weakness that you see in sulphuricum acidum, the weakness is primarily around the digestive organs. They feel cold and relaxed and very, very weak. And even cold drinks and foods will aggravate the stomach. They're so weak. So the only thing that these patients want is something that's stimulating, like brandy or some type of alcoholic drink that stimulates their stomach function, and they don't want any water. What they want are alcoholic drinks. The stomach is so weak that they will vomit all food. Anything that they consume will be ejected as this very sour material, and they will have tremendous heartburn. Now you'll see the burning element that's so common for the acid remedies manifest very clearly here in the burning eructations and the heartburn, which is so typical of sulphuricum acidum. You see a lot of eructations, burning, sour eructations in sulphuricum acidum. And sulphuricum acidum is a remedy you'll think of for inebriates who are in their last legs. So they've gone beyond the nux vomica state. These are people who have drunk alcohol, their liver is exhausted, they might even have cirrhosis of the liver, they're in an exhausted, weakened state. They've gone beyond the nux vomica condition. They're in a much more exhausted, weakened state from all the alcohol consumption. They're completely run down, and as I said earlier, they've passed the condition which would have been an indication of a nux vomica type of state. You'll find them pale, just like the patient that I gave the sulphuricum acidum to, shriveled looking. That's called a Hippocratic countenance, so they're old looking. They can't tolerate any food. They can't drink water unless it contains whiskey or alcohol. Again, the acid remedies are a group of remedies that we'll think of for people who are more degenerate in their disease processes. These are end-stage remedies. We think of for people who are in a very exhausted, weakened state where they've gone beyond the nux vomica condition, and you can really see the toxicity and the complete degeneration of their internal organs. In these types of situations, the liver will become enlarged, and oftentimes you'll see associated with the liver problems is a dry cough. Oftentimes you'll see eructations and a dry cough in concomitants to each other. So belching, coughing, and when they cough, the liver will hurt, and you'll see that they've abused the liver from overconsumption of alcohol. You'll also see a watery diarrhea, which is very offensive. Again, the idea of wateriness and offensiveness that we find in the acid remedies. And this will be accompanied by irritability, lots of oozing of moisture from the rectum. It's a very important remedy for hemorrhoids, which burn and that have a lot of dampness in conjunction with stomach problems. Big hemorrhoid remedy. And all of the symptoms, the diarrhea, the hemorrhoids, everything will be aggravated from cold drinks, from acidic fruit, or from anything that's acidic. Like in the case of the patient that I presented, he was aggravated from the vinegar from the salad dressing. Lots of palpitations in this remedy, diarrhea and constipation, cold, damp feet, coldness and dampness are found very typically in the sulphuricum acidum cases. Lots of dyspepsia of the drunkards. And this is a sour remedy. You'll differentiate it from carbo-veg in that carbo-veg is a putrid remedy. In carbo-veg, the odors smell like rotting meat, whereas in sulphuricum acidum, it's a sour remedy. Everything will smell acidy and sour, like the fact that it is an acid remedy itself. As a matter of fact, sulphuricum acidum was used in olden days to actually mitigate the craving for alcohol. They would take a few drops of sulphuricum acidum, they would put it in water, and people would drink it, and supposedly it would minimize the craving for alcoholic drinks. It's also a remedy. It's very useful for complaints that are found in alcoholics, like all kinds of eructations, hiccuping, heartburns, nausea, vomiting, hemorrhoids, ulcers, all of these things which are associated with alcohol consumption when the symptoms fit can be an indication for sulphuricum acidum. You'll also find it as a remedy, again, think of the acids as remedies that we think of for breakdown states, end-stage processes. So aphthous, sores in the mouth, debility of protracted diseases, children with summer complaints or marasmus where they're emaciated and deficient and weak and have kwashiorkor. Those are the types of circumstances where acid remedies can be indicated, and sulphuricum acidum can definitely be indicated with aphthous, sores, and things of that type. It's also a very, very important remedy for first aid conditions. You can use it for traumas. Oftentimes you'll think of it after the bruises of soft parts where you've given arnica, arnica is worked, it's helped in the case, but all at once it stops working, and then you give sulphuricum acidum and it acts as a complement and finishes the cure of the case. Or you've had an injury to a gland or the breast, and you've given conium, and conium has worked very nicely, and it's done very well in the case, but then it stopped working, and then you'll follow with sulphuricum acidum, and it will complete and complement conium and finish the cure of the case. Or you've had an injury to the periosteum, and you've given a remedy like ruta, and ruta has worked very nicely, and it's progressed very beautifully in the case, but ruta has stopped working, and you will think of sulphuricum acidum to complete the case. So sulphuricum acidum is a very good remedy that you'll think of either for injuries, mechanical injuries in elderly people where there's necrosis and gangrene that occurs to the tissue, or as a follow-up to any other remedy like arnica or bellis perennis or conium or ruta, where that remedy has worked well for a while, but it stopped working, and then sulphuricum acid comes in and it finishes with the work of the previous remedy. One of the very common things that you'll find in people who need sulphuricum acidum chronically is they will report a lot of accidents, and it should definitely be added to the rubric accident prone. The reason that sulphuricum acidum patients tend to be so prone to accidents is that they are very hurried, and because of the fact that they're hurried, they will tend to put themselves into situations where they get into accidents. And this is why you see very commonly that people who need this remedy for their chronic state will oftentimes report a lot of accidents in their history. These are people who are hurried, like metarhinum or argentum nitricum, and as a consequence, like those other remedies as well, you'll see argentum nitricum, you'll see metarhinum in this rubric as well, will also perpetuate accidents. And also, very important, sulphuricum acidum of all the acid remedies is the one that is the strongest hemorrhagic diathesis, followed by nitricum acidum. The hemorrhagic diathesis is so strong that they can literally bleed from every orifice of the body. The blood is oftentimes dark and thin, so this will oftentimes remind you of snake remedies. So you might confuse it with a remedy like Crotalus horridus, which bleeds from every orifice of the body, or a remedy like Elaps corallinus, which has dark and thin bleeding. If you look at all the bleeding of sulphuricum acidum, bleeding from the eyes, bloody discharges, ecchymosis, lots of purpura hemorrhagica with black and blue and purple discoloration of the skin from various types of bleeding. So epistaxis, ecchymosis, purpura hemorrhagica, blood hemorrhaging black, bleeding from every orifice of the body. And if you look at this repertorization, you'll see that number 2 and number 3 are, not surprisingly, the remedies lachesis and Crotalus horridus, which are remedies which can be easily confused with sulphuricum acidum. The personalities can be quite a bit different. You won't see the strong jealousy in sulphuricum acidum or egotism that you'll find in remedies like lachesis and Crotalus horridus. And remember that sulphuricum acidum has lots of black, blue, red, and purple discolorations over the various parts of the body, like you would see, for example, in a remedy like lachesis. They can even have bleeding during pneumonia. And it's one of the top remedies for oral thrush. Again, this idea of dampness, oozing moisture, hemorrhoids, oral thrush. And also aphthai, lots of breakdown, ulcers in the mouth, oftentimes associated with oral thrush. And lots of ulcers in the mouth as well, the breakdown processes that we see so commonly associated with acid remedies. It's also a good remedy in diphtheria and has been used historically for diphtheria with great effect. In terms of aggravations, they tend to be particularly aggravated by smog, fumes, smoke, and also strong perfumes. And like the acid remedies in general, with the exception of Floricum acidum and Gallicum acidum, this tends to be a chilly remedy that's aggravated by cold and drought. It's like Phosphoricum acidum, Nitricum acidum, Picricum acidum, Acidicum acidum. Most of the acids are a chilly group. Farouk Master has added it to the rubric Love of Computers. I haven't seen this, but I thought it was an interesting symptom. And when comparing Sulphuricum acidum, you'll want to study it in comparison with lachesis. Here you can see all the similarities. And you'll also want to compare it with Nux vomica. Again, many similarities between Sulphuricum acidum and Nux vomica. Okay, so anyway, hopefully that was a good exposition of the remedy Sulphuricum acidum, and you'll be able to recognize it. And you can see how it has certain similarities to some of the other acid remedies. I want to thank everybody for your participation, and especially Mandy and Penny, thank you for your assistance. I want to wish everybody a very good rest of your night, and hopefully we'll get to do more of these in the future. Thanks, everybody.
Kim.
Great,
My
thanks,
pleasure.
Kim. That was very
Thanks,
good.
Kim.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.